Hello and welcome to another edition of the Entrepreneur's Playbook. I'm your host, Phil D'Amico, where each and every week we examine those key issues facing entrepreneurs today. There may be no greater issue facing entrepreneurs than that of economic development, workforce development, and education. To help us sort through what is happening now, and not only in Indiana, but across the country, we welcome Tom Miller, who's the president and CEO of Thomas P. Miller and Associates, and Carol D'Amico, who is one of their senior consultants on education issues. And if the last name's familiar, yes, Carol is the more intelligent and more attractive of the D'Amico clan. But it's great to have both of you. As I mentioned in the opening, Tom, there are probably no greater issues facing entrepreneurs today than what's happening in our communities from an economic development standpoint and education and workforce development. Maybe give us an overview of some of the projects that you see on a daily basis that communities are facing today.
Well, in the past, communities have reached out and done a lot of business attraction where they tried to woo companies into their community. There's been some focus in many communities around how do you grow your existing business. But the newest of the efforts to grow the economy is, in fact, the innovation entrepreneurial economy. Regions and states are trying to figure out the most effective way to get that done in light of our recent experience with COVID. One often overlooked aspect of that is the whole issue of talent and workforce. Yes, you need capital, but more importantly, you need talent. So that's where our firm, Thomas P. Miller and Associates, fits in.
Yeah, a great segue. By the way, you're natural at this. Carol, workforce development and talent issues are things that I'm hearing all across. It doesn't matter what community I'm in. What are you seeing in these areas right now? Maybe start with Indiana, because I know you are more global and you do look at other things across the country, but maybe focus on Indiana right now.
Well, Indiana, like the rest of the country, is experiencing a major labor shortage. There's 10 million jobs open today across the country. 8 years ago, when I started at a new organization that was dedicated to closing that gap, it was 6 million 8 years ago. It's 10 million today. And coincidentally, there's almost that many people available for jobs. About 9 million people are available. So there's a mismatch somewhere. In Indiana, there's about 100,000 job openings. And the labor force, the people in the labor force, we don't have full participation in the labor force. In fact, it's only about 63% in Indiana. So we've got to get people back engaged in the labor force. That is just has to be priority number one. And there are many strategies to that. A lot of people are wanting to change jobs post-COVID. That's why a lot of people have left the labor force. They want to change careers. A lot of women have left the labor force. 3 million women have left the labor force since COVID. So we've got a lot of talent gaps that we need to fill.
Yeah, no, those are all great numbers. I do want to get into some specifics and do some follow-up here. But Tom, based on some of those numbers, what are the challenges for communities that are trying to address some of the key areas that Carol talked about? So if you're a community, where should you start and how should you form a strategy? Obviously, besides call you first, what are some of the strategies that individuals and communities need to look at?
Well, and Carol's exactly right with the numbers and the talent shortage issues that she cited. I will also say that as we see this significant talent shortage across the nation, we also see people who have been left behind. People in the hospitality industry, women, ethnic groups, and others have been left behind. And so in their lives, there is not a talent shortage, there is a severe depression. And for the first time in our country's history, we have a talent shortage and a depression going on at the same moment. I think what our initial advice is to communities and states is to think of the workforce as a talent supply chain. And there is no single magic bullet to solve the workforce problem. There are a series of things that you have to do and address. Some of them are at the K-12 level, some are at the post-secondary level, the community college and higher ed level. And then there's prison populations and a variety of other pools of talent that you have to figure out how to tap into.
Yeah, and Tom, one of the challenges that I always saw as working on the chamber side and in economic development was trying to bring all factions together, try to get education to communicate with municipalities, municipalities with the workforce, and so that all of them were in sync. I think that's a very big challenge that communities face. I don't know, are you seeing that as well?
Phil, we are, and I think you've articulated it well, is that um, the various stakeholders come to the table many times quite sincerely and genuinely, but often speak a different language. If employers talk about talent in a different way than higher education people and so forth. So at the end of the day, it's critical that these stakeholders and these organizations that genuinely want to address it come to the table, openly and consistently communicate. And it's important that they also build a relationship which will enable them to sustain their efforts and carry forward.
Yeah, and Carol, what you guys have laid out is really, I'm looking at it saying these are very critical numbers for communities and long-term success. You talked about there are potentially some things that communities can do, whether it's from the education standpoint, workforce side. What are some of those initiatives that you're seeing that might be best practices or that are working somewhere, maybe outside of Indiana?
Well, I'll let Tom address this too. I mean, one of the more, I guess, radical, let's say, opportunities for communities is to really look at the skills that their residents have, not the degrees,
Right.
not the education credentials, but what are the actual skills that are in the communities, whether somebody has a degree or not. 70% of Americans who were surveyed recently said they want a chance at a job, but they don't have the degree. And 48% of employers said they're willing to do that. So I think we've got to find a way to capture what the skills are of people and to match them with the skills that are needed. And let's not always focus on what degrees people have. The degrees will come later. Let's get them in the job market. Let's get them a job. Let's focus on the strengths that they have and build toward those strengths. That's a very radical departure for how we hire and promote in the US.
Yeah, I always love what Dave Ramsey said. He says, "Don't bring me sheepskin, bring me sheep." And so I think that's a very, very appropriate way to look at it. But are there specific states, Carol, that have figured this out, or specific regions that have figured this out? And maybe where does Indiana fall short?
I always struggle with this question because I wish I could point to a state or a city that had it all together and had it all right. There are places that have something together.
Sure.
But right now, I'd say there's really, Tom may offer another view of this. I can't say, well, let's all go to Charlotte, North Carolina, and copy what they did.
Right.
There are pieces everywhere. I think one of the things that Indiana could do better is engage employers more in the education design and delivery of education. There are states that are doing much more in that area, whether it's internships and apprenticeships and getting employers involved in the design and the delivery. Americans really want that connection to work, and we make it very difficult. We make it, very not a transparent path. And I think that connecting employers and educators is something that Indiana could do more of. I don't know, Tom may have some other views on that.
Yeah, I was going to follow up on that, Tom. I mean, are there, in your working across the country, are there some states and some key areas that, you hear things when you're in economic development? There are certain states, and we have some neighboring states that always get high marks in certain areas, but you're in this every day. Are there areas that have figured this out?
Well, there are some. I would point just two or three things. I think Northeast Ohio and in through there have done as good as anybody at immobilizing the private sector and making sure that their specific skills and needs that Carol just talked about are articulated to the education providers. So I would point to them as a very solid model that's driven by the employer community. the greater Pittsburgh region that stretches into Pennsylvania, West Virginia, and Ohio. I think there's an organization over there called Team that has done as well as anybody at mobilizing higher ed and community colleges in particular to build a true partnership. And state of Oklahoma, I think, has done exceptionally well at addressing their existing employer base and really leveraging their business assets and trying to figure out how to grow from those existing business. So those are just a few that I would mention.
Yeah, what's interesting, Tom, one thing you said early in the broadcast here was, we've kind of had to change a little bit of our focus in from the recruitment side to maybe help growing existing business. Retention and expansion is, I think, even during these times, probably far more critical of a strategy than kind of looking at going after a whale and trying to bring that in. Is that something that you would suggest some of these communities look at?
I absolutely. I think first and foremost, looking at your existing businesses and trying to figure out not how to sell programs to them, but how to identify what their needs are and helping them address their needs. I think that's a critical piece of the growth of a state, of a city, of a region, is focusing on your existing businesses. I think that's the starting point for economic growth.
Yeah, great point. Carol, it's interesting. During the last hailstorm we had here in Indiana, in Indianapolis, I was the beneficiary getting some hail damage to my car. Took it in to the automotive, and he said, "Look, I'd love to help you." He said, "I can't get you in. This is 2 months ago. I can't get you in until September. We just don't have enough automotive technicians." And so, not only that, you look on the construction side and those kinds of things. Career and tech ed, I would think, would be a very good strategy for some communities right now that might help fill some of those millions of jobs you've talked about. Is career and tech ed a big factor here?
Yeah, and Tom can speak to that too. He's helping a couple of communities rethink their career tech ed systems. I think it is time to think about how we reinvigorate the career tech ed, especially in some of these skilled trades, and find innovative ways to involve young adults into these programs and make it easy for them to do so, and show them that these jobs are very interesting. And they're mostly dealing with, it's an IT job, really.
Right.
What it is.
Yeah, you're right.
And really helping them understand what these jobs are and aren't anymore. Somebody was even telling me that with bricklayers anymore, it's the robot that's really doing the hard work. And what the people are doing with the bricklaying is they're programming the machine that is laying the brick. So we've got to educate people about these jobs, what they pay, and really what they are and what they aren't.
Yeah, it's interesting, Tom, to Carol's point. These jobs are very well paying jobs now, $20+ per hour in a lot of cases. The hours are good. As Carol said, the working conditions are good. I would think this is a key area for opportunity, not only now, but I think 10 years from now, is to really expose kids to a new type of manufacturing.
No, I think Carol and you as well, Phil, articulated this well. I mean, the path to prosperity runs through post-secondary credentials. And by that, I mean, yes, it could be a college degree, but it could also be a technical degree that is obtained while you were in high school, maybe like the technician jobs of which you're speaking. Might require a little bit of work beyond high school, but having a credential that basically gives you the skill to take with you into today's technology-driven economy is absolutely essential. And being able to figure out as you go into the economy from high school or wherever, other pathways available to you to keep your occupation vibrant and up to speed in terms of modern technology. So stacking credentials and stacking certificates is critical.
Yeah. So we got about 14 minutes left. I want to get more into some of the strategy side of things, Tom. When a community contacts you, what are some of the first things that you do to help them think through a process and identify exactly where do I start? What's the end game here? How long should I expect? Is this a 1-year plan, 3-year plan? So maybe walk us through some of the strategy, key component part of that.
Well, one of the things a couple of things that I'll say we do is we focus people on their economic assets. What is your city? What is your community? Where are your business assets and whatnot? It's very difficult to become the Silicon Valley. And so, but you can become a lot of great things and be a very vibrant region or community, but taking stock of your assets and figuring out how you should leverage those strengths is really critical. And the 4-letter word that we use is it's okay to have an idea, but do you have a plan? And so really taking an idea or taking some vision and crafting it into a plan is the way to go. And you can accomplish things in a matter of months if you focus on short-term, near-term opportunities and mold that together with longer-term strategy.
Yeah. And are they looking though, typically when they come to you, are they looking out saying we want this to be our 1-year, 3-year, 5-year? Is there usually time frame associated with this? Or...
That's in the good old days, it used to take about a year, 9 months to go through a planning process pre-internet. Those days are gone. And
Right.
I think it's very possible to put together a crisp, well-focused, data-driven strategy in a matter of 3 to 4 months. I mean, there's a variety of ways to mobilize now. We're doing it via Zoom right now.
Right.
And so you can move at a much faster pace than you could maybe 20 years ago or so. So 3 to 4, 6 months, maybe, I think you could have a good plan and you can start seeing results if you're flexible, nimble, and move rapidly.
Yeah, no, you're right. And by the way, Carol loves talking to me via Zoom because she could always shut it off whenever she gets tired of it. So, but Carol, from the education side, Tom brought up a couple really good points. What have you seen, like from a strategy standpoint? These are long-term, in education, it's long-term, right? So typically education, and you know this better than I, doesn't move at a speedboat pace in a lot of cases. So from an education standpoint, how long are some of these initiatives and strategic plans? How long do they go out for?
One of the good things that I think happened during COVID, and they're very few, is education did respond to the need almost right away, especially in K-12. They pivoted to do these micro schools. They had learning pods. They went online quickly. So I think they proved they can innovate rather quickly when they have to. The challenge is going to be with the deficit of learning that has happened, though, as a result of this disruption. The test results came out a few weeks ago. Only 28% of students in grades 3 to 8 were proficient in English and math. Only 28%. In the 11th grade test, only 36% of students were proficient in English and math. There has been a tremendous loss of learning, and particularly in some of our most vulnerable communities and vulnerable populations. They're going to have to act very quickly to get these young people up to speed very quickly, or we're going to see the ripple effect. They're not going to be ready for college. They're not going to be ready for post-secondary credentials. They're not going to be ready for work. Catching up is going to be the biggest challenge, not just this state has, but across the country.
Yeah, it's going to be interesting. I had former Governor Mitch Daniels on it when he took over Purdue. I had him on the program, and I said, "What's the biggest area that you're really looking at over the next 10, whatever years?" And he said, it's the online factor. And we've got to get a handle on this from Purdue's side. Of course, they acted pretty quickly, got the online version. But where do you see online education taking us, Carol? Are they going to help prepare us for some of the jobs that you talked about that are out there right now?
Absolutely. I think it has the capacity to tailor the individual learning to be, quicker, less expensive, more tailored to what you need to know.
Right.
But I think the education providers, colleges, universities, schools, are going to have to pivot so that it's a quality experience. They put it in place very quickly, and some of the evidence is that it needs an upgraded quality, though.
Yeah, Tom, we got about 7, 8 minutes left. I want to get Carol's thoughts on this as well. Getting tangible numbers, like knowing that whatever initiatives you're rolling out are a success. How critical is that, Tom, to see immediate results, to know that what we're doing, we've seen, exponential growth, dollars, revenue, whatever it is coming in, number of jobs created, those kinds of things coming into a community. How critical is it to be able to measure some of those things?
It's very critical, and it's very critical for a number of reasons. First, you want to know, is your plan producing the results that you want to see it produce? It's also a confidence builder. If you start to see movement, trend lines going in the right direction, that gives all the stakeholders that were participating and involved confidence that they can, hey, we've got some early things going, let's buckle down and keep working at it. And so it gives them confidence in what they're doing. We do, in fact, build dashboards, as it's often referred to, into the planning process, and the ability to produce results so you can quickly see, are your efforts paying off, and so forth. And frankly, to your question earlier, how long does it have to take? Because we engage people every step of the way, you can start implementing your plan before the ink is dry. And start, if there's an opportunity out there, why miss it because the ink hasn't dried? Go for it. We'll get the plan finished up and proofread. So anyway.
Yeah, no, that's great. I hear all the time, Indiana is one of the top states in the country for economic development. I want to get your thoughts. I mean, are we, in fact, we always seem to be in the top 5 in some of those key measurables. Your thoughts on that? And Carol, I want to get the same question on education, but Tom, from an economic development standpoint.
Indiana's got a great platform of fiscal responsibility, low taxes, a whole variety of things. And so it's a great place to locate a business or grow a business. I think Indiana also recognizes that part of the equation that's getting increasingly important is the whole education workforce piece. So they're putting in place a variety of strategies to make sure the human capital is there, as well as the tax climate. And so we're second to none in terms of seeing the future and adapting strategies to be able to address it.
Yeah, and Carol, I was going to get to that question next. Is from the workforce development standpoint, education side, where does Indiana rank? And what are some things that we need to really keep our eye on?
Well, we're in about the middle of the pack.
Okay.
Not the best, not the worst. I think we've got a lot of assets, though, that a lot of states actually don't have. The governor created a workforce cabinet where everyone in his state agency and private employers are involved in education workforce come together. Has great opportunity as it goes forward. We've got now the superintendent of education appointed by the governor. We've got a commissioner of higher education who's very metric driven toward a goal. So I think we've got a lot of assets to address this issue once we all agree on the common goals that we're trying to achieve.
How do we, I have a daughter, your niece, that looks outside of Indiana sometimes because they have mountains or lakes, or, how do we get past some of those quality of life things that, I know Indianapolis is a vibrant city, it has its challenges for sure, but, there are other cities out there that may be more attractive to the millennial generation. How do we combat that?
They boomerang back though once reality hits them, right?
Right. Yeah.
Go have your fun, but once you realize that you can live a lot less expensively in
Sure.
Indiana and have a great quality of life, they tend to boomerang back. I don't know what you think, Tom.
No,
I'd love to get your thoughts on that, Tom.
Well, I would just say, Carol's working on moving mountains to Indiana, but while she's working on that, One thing that we have found, and thanks to the investment Lilly Endowment made a number of years ago, the more you focus on work-based learning, internships, co-ops, apprenticeship, the more you submit people to their home community or their region, if you will. There will be some that do in fact want to leave Indiana for a while, but I think as long as we do a great job at work-based learning and making sure they see all the opportunity in Indiana and stay in touch with them and communicate to them. So even if they do leave for a few years, we're able to boomerang them back.
Tom, I know this was something you and I have not really discussed, and I do want to get your thoughts. So, the higher ed plays a big role in economic development, right? The proximity to IU, Purdue, Notre Dame, Butler, you name it, all the fine, Ball State, all of the fine institutions we have in the state. The higher ed, I believe, plays a very large part in economic development, does it not?
I think it does. It does. And each have unique strengths. And we, have really tried to emphasize to communities and regions that do in fact have four-year institutions, that they should really leverage and work carefully with those institutions. They can be a critical partner as they think about how to, work on innovation, entrepreneurism, and so forth. And that's not to leave out the two-year institutions. Ivy Tech's the largest single community college system in the nation. They're rolling out some entrepreneurial things. Vincennes University is second to none in advanced manufacturing. So we've got a lot of higher education strengths in Indiana.
Yeah, very good point. And that's great. I appreciate you having my back on that. I totally forgot about some of the creative things going on at some of those institutions. Carol, real quick, got about 3 minutes left. Higher ed, what role does that play in helping economic development and a state succeed in a number of the key initiatives that we've discussed today?
Well, they're the ones that fuel the talent. Mm-hmm. And so they've got to be aligned where the industry growth is. And in our institutions, I think have done a pretty good job of trying to stay in touch with that. I can look at other states that have flagship universities that say, that's not my job. That is not the attitude in Indiana with any of our universities and colleges. And it's still prevalent in other states. So I think it's a real strength of Indiana, actually.
Yeah, couldn't agree more. About a minute to go. I do want to get one final thought from each of you. Tom, where do we see things going coming out of COVID? Are we going to come out of this stronger? Where do you think? Is it another year before are we starting to see, signs of recovery now?
I think we're seeing signs of recovery now. And I think the future's bright ahead of us, and we just have to stay focused and continually update plans and strategies in light of developments that none of us can foresee today.
Yeah, and Carol, from an education standpoint, do we see some of these jobs getting filled that you talked about? What are some things that we see on the horizon there?
I think Indiana is doing everything it can to position itself to come out of this strong. They have, compared to some other states. Certainly, the General Assembly has put money into communities to help them think about post-COVID era in their own communities. So I think Indiana is thinking in the right way.
Yeah, well, thank you so much to both of you. We're going to keep a real close eye on this. We'll have you back as this thing evolves. And Tom, I know what you're thinking. You're looking at Carol, looking at me and saying, how did it skip a gene coming to me with intellect? I get it. I get it all the time, Tom. So, but it's so good to have both of you. Thank you so much for the expertise, the knowledge. We'll keep an eye on this and have you back.
Thanks.
Thank you, Phil.
Thanks for the opportunity. Bye.
That's all for this week's edition of the Entrepreneur's Playbook. I'm Phil D'Amico. We appreciate you watching each and every week. Thank you so much. We'll see you next week.